It hits you before you even open your eyes. The phantom vibration against your thigh, the weight of the unread messages multiplying by the second, the cold dread that today is the day the thread finally snaps. You're sitting in the ergonomically optimized chair you earned after 3 years of 80-hour weeks, staring at the dual monitors that frame your life, and your jaw is clenched so tight your molars ache. The corporate lie is simple, elegant, and devastating. The next milestone will finally quiet the hum. The promotion, the bonus, the corner office, the upgraded lease. They tell you these are the cure. But the finish line keeps moving, and the hum just gets louder. 2,000 years ago, the architects of the greatest empire in history understood a fundamental truth about power, sanity, and wealth that we have entirely forgotten. They didn't build their lives around the desperate acquisition of more. They built an ancient firewall against burnout. The Romans encoded their secret to true wealth into 3 inseparable pillars: Frugalitas, Liberalitas, and Industria. To them, wealth was never defined by having much. True wealth was defined by needing little. You've tried the modern prescriptions. You downloaded the meditation app, paid for the premium subscription, and let the Australian woman's voice tell you to breathe while your inbox stacked up. You tried therapy, rehashing your childhood ambition, analyzing your need for external validation. You even dabbled in quiet quitting, doing the bare minimum, which only left you with a different flavor of anxiety, the terrifying sensation of stagnation. And they all failed. You know why? Because they treat the symptom. They try to soothe the inflamed mind without excising the poison. The Romans didn't want to soothe the soul. They wanted to forge it in fire and make it invulnerable to the whims of the mob and the market. This is the story of Julian Hayes, a 35-year-old investment banker in New York who had everything the corporate world said would make him happy, and it was destroying him. Who is Julian Hayes? He is the archetype of the modern elite performer. He is 35, a vice president at a mid-tier bulge bracket bank in Midtown Manhattan, pulling down a base salary that would make his high school guidance counselor weep, with a bonus that fluctuates wildly depending on the whims of the macroeconomic climate. Where does he operate? On the 42nd floor of a steel and glass monolith on Park Avenue, overlooking the East River. When does this story begin? On a rainy Tuesday in November at exactly 3:14 p.m. Why does he do it? To justify the 6-figure golden handcuffs, the mortgage on a 2-bedroom condo in Tribeca that he rarely sees, and the suffocating belief that this is the only path to security. How does it manifest? It manifests in the sterile, dry air chill of the open-plan floor. It is the low, metallic whir of the HVAC system that never shuts off, pumping oxygen-depleted air into the lungs of 200 analysts and associates. It is the faint, perpetual scent of stale Starbucks and ozone from overworked laptop processors. It is the visual flatness of the fluorescent overhead lights, humming at a frequency designed to be imperceptible, but which drills directly into the prefrontal cortex, casting a pallid, lifeless glow over spreadsheets and power ties. It is the ambient, rhythmic tapping of styluses on glass screens, the muffled overlapping voices bleeding through the drywall from conference calls in languages Julian doesn't speak, and the sudden, jarring trill of a desk phone shattering the monotony. It is a relentless, suffocating blanket of beige and steel, an atmospheric pressure that pushes down on the shoulders, demanding output, demanding motion, demanding more. It is a collective, unspoken anxiety that seeps into the pores the moment you badge through the turnstiles. The breaking point doesn't arrive with a dramatic crash. It is not a tragedy, a firing, or a public meltdown. It is a micro-collapse, a moment of terrifying clarity in the middle of a quarterly projections meeting. Julian is standing at the head of the boardroom table, projecting a deck he built until 2 a.m. He is explaining the EBITDA adjustments for a potential acquisition. He is speaking, his mouth moving, the words coming out in the practiced, slightly accelerated cadence of a man who knows his time is being timed. Across the table sits Rhett, the managing director. Rhett isn't looking at Julian. Rhett is looking at his phone, his thumb scrolling methodically. To Rhett's left is an associate, typing furiously on a laptop, her eyes locked on her screen. To Rhett's right, another VP is quietly whispering to a colleague, a private joke passing between them. Julian finishes a complex point about synergies. He pauses, waiting for the inevitable pushback, the aggressive questioning that proves they are paying attention. Rhett continues scrolling. The associate continues typing. No one is looking at Julian. He is not a person in that room. He is a flesh drive, an organic conduit for data, projecting numbers onto a screen so that the people who actually matter can ignore them. Julian's throat tightens. His peripheral vision blurs. The hum of the HVAC system seems to amplify, drowning out his own heartbeat. He realizes, with a sudden, vertiginous drop in his stomach, that he is entirely invisible. If he stopped speaking right now and walked out, it would take them a full minute to notice the silence. He forces himself to keep talking. He pushes through the fog, reciting the rest of the slide by rote memory, his hands gripping the edge of the table to stop them from shaking. As he sits back down, the acid rising in his throat, the internal lie reasserts itself, a toxic loop that has kept him running on the hamster wheel for a decade. If I just work harder, if I close the next deal, if I make managing director, I'll finally feel safe. They'll finally see me. I'll finally have enough. The lie is a hook in his jaw, and every time he thrashes, it only sinks deeper. Julian didn't seek out Arthur Pendleton. Arthur was thrust upon him by the firm's archaic senior advisor program, a PR initiative designed to park retired heavyweights in glass offices so the bank could leverage their Rolodex while pretending to care about institutional memory. Arthur Pendleton was unlike anyone else on the 42nd floor. He was 72, a former senior partner who had weathered the crashes of 1987, 2001, and 2008, and emerged not with the manic, battle-scared energy of a survivor, but with the unnerving calm of a man who had simply stepped off the battlefield. Arthur wore bespoke suits that were impeccably tailored but somehow devoid of the desperate peacocking of the younger bankers. His shoes were polished but not flashy. He didn't check his phone in the hallways. He didn't drink the office coffee, preferring a small ceramic thermos of black tea he brought from home. In a building where everyone was running 100 miles an hour just to stay in place, Arthur moved like a man who owned time itself. He was untouchable. One late Thursday afternoon, while Julian was spiraling in his office, staring blankly at an email from Rhett demanding a completely revised model by 8 a.m. the next morning, Arthur appeared in the doorway. Arthur didn't knock. He just leaned against the doorframe, holding his tea, watching Julian's trembling hand hover over the mouse. "You're vibrating, Julian," Arthur said, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that cut through the ambient office static. "I can see it from down the hall." Julian forced a tight corporate smile. "Just a tight timeline, Arthur. Rhett needs the Meridian model restructured by morning." "It's fine. I'll get it done." Arthur took a slow sip of his tea. He looked around Julian's office, the messy stacks of paper, the empty takeout containers, the anxiety. He looked back at Julian, his eyes unblinking, seeing straight through the polished facade of the investment banker into the terrified 35-year-old underneath. "Are you building a career, Julian?" Arthur asked quietly. "Or are you building a cage?" The question hit Julian like a physical blow. It was a sledgehammer to the carefully constructed narrative he had sold himself. The corner office, the title, the comp. It was supposed to be a fortress, but sitting there at 6 p.m., knowing he wouldn't see his bed until 3 a.m., knowing he would wake up and do it all over again tomorrow, the walls suddenly looked like bars. Pause for a moment. Look at your own life. Right now. Strip away the email signature. Strip away the LinkedIn headline. Strip away the business cards and the ergonomic chair and the direct reports. If your job title were stripped away tomorrow, what remains of your dignitas? Dignitas, the Roman concept of intrinsic worth, personal standing, and gravitas. Not the borrowed authority of a corporation, but the unshakable foundation of your own character. Who are you when the logo is gone? If you have no answer, you are not a professional. You are a hostage. Julian couldn't sleep that night. Arthur's question echoed in the dark of his Tribeca condo, louder than the distant sirens on West Street. At 7 a.m., he was standing outside Arthur's townhouse in the West Village, a brownstone that radiated a quiet, settled permanence that his glass condo building never could. Arthur answered the door in a heavy wool cardigan. He didn't seem surprised to see Julian. He led him through a house that was impeccably curated but notably sparse. No clutter, no excess. Just furniture built to last, books actually read, and a silence that felt heavy and luxurious after the chaotic static of Midtown. They stood in Arthur's study. The walls were lined with ancient history texts, well-worn and broken on the spine. Arthur poured Julian a black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and handed it to him. "You want to know how to survive that floor without losing your mind," Arthur stated. It wasn't a question. "I want to know how you did it," Julian replied. "You walked away at the top. You don't seem broken by it. Everyone else up there is one bad quarter away from a heart attack." Arthur sat in a leather club chair, gesturing for Julian to sit across from him. The Romans had a secret, Julian. They understood that the man who needs $1 million to feel secure is infinitely poorer than the man who needs 100. The empire was not built by men who craved luxury. It was built by men who practiced frugalitas. Julian frowned. "Frugality? I'm an investment banker, Arthur. We don't do frugal. We do growth. Accumulation." "Exactly," Arthur said, his eyes sharp. "And that is why you are vibrating. You think wealth is the accumulation of having much. The Romans defined wealth as the discipline of needing little. Frugalitas is the foundation. It is the armor. Without it, you are entirely dependent on the market, on the bonus, on Rhett's approval. If you need little, you fear little. Frugalitas buys you the only asset that actually matters, independence." Arthur leaned forward. "To master it, you must first master the morning. Tomorrow you will wake up at 4 a.m. Julian almost laughed. "I already wake up at 5:30 to check the Asian markets." "No," Arthur cut him off, his voice like iron. "You will wake up at 4 a.m. not to work, not to check your phone, not to read the overnight emails. You will wake up, go to your living room, and sit in a chair, in the dark, in silence, for 1 hour. You will do nothing." Julian stared at him. "Just sit?" "You will sit," Arthur repeated. "You will not move. You will not stimulate. You will face the absolute void of a sleeping city. Your mind will scream at you to check the phone. It will tell you that you are wasting time, that you are falling behind, that you need to act. You will ignore it. You will sit until the panic passes. That is the first lesson of Frugalitas. You must learn to deprive the machine of its fuel. You must learn to need nothing for 1 hour. To understand why Arthur's prescription is so agonizing and so profoundly effective, you have to look under the hood of the modern corporate brain. We are operating in a constant state of neurobiological emergency. Every ping of the Slack channel, every email notification, every frantic demand from a managing director triggers the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal (HPA) axis. This is your body's central stress response system. When activated, your amygdala, the brain's threat detection center, signals the hypothalamus, which floods your bloodstream with cortisol and adrenaline. In the ancestral environment, this cortisol loop saved your life. It gave you the burst of energy to outrun a predator. But on the 42nd floor of an investment bank, there are no lions. There are only endless low-grade psychological threats. The modern office keeps the HPA axis permanently engaged. Cortisol stays elevated. When cortisol is chronically high, it literally shrinks the dendrites in your prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for executive function, decision-making, and emotional regulation. Simultaneously, it strengthens the amygdala, making you more reactive, more anxious, and more prone to fear. You are not thinking clearly. You are just surviving. Furthermore, the constant context switching of the modern knowledge worker, checking an email, glancing at Slack, answering a call, triggers microdopamine hits. You become addicted to the variable reinforcement schedule of the inbox. You need the notification to feel normal. When you don't get it, you experience neurochemical withdrawal. This is the gray noise of the corporate environment, a state of dopaminergic depletion and cortisol saturation that leaves you exhausted, paranoid, and unable to focus deeply on anything. Arthur's instruction, sitting in silence at 4 a.m., is not a spiritual hack. It is a brutal neurobiological intervention. By sitting in silence, you are actively starving the amygdala of threat stimuli. You are refusing to trigger the dopamine loop. The panic you feel in that chair is the sound of your neurochemistry begging for its fix. But if you hold the line, if you sit through the withdrawal, something remarkable happens. The HPA axis downregulates. Cortisol levels begin to drop. The prefrontal cortex, starved of the chaotic noise, begins to restore its executive control. You are not just sitting, you are rebuilding the cognitive architecture necessary to withstand the siege of the market. You are forging the Roman virtue of Frugalitas at the synaptic level. Julian's first attempt was a disaster. At 4 a.m., his Tribeca condo was tomb silent. He sat in an armchair, hands on his knees, phone locked in the kitchen. Within 5 minutes, his skin itched. By minute 10, his heart was racing, his leg bouncing in a frantic rhythm against the hardwood floor. His brain generated a terrifying catalog of emergencies. What if the Tokyo desk is crashing? What if Rhett emailed a revision? What if I'm getting fired right now? The silence wasn't peaceful. It was deafening, a vacuum that his mind desperately tried to fill with the familiar numbing static of the office. He made it 17 minutes before he broke, sprinting to the kitchen to check his phone. There were no emergencies, just a marketing email and a reminder to pick up his dry cleaning. He felt sick with the realization of his own conditioning. He was a junkie, and the drug was the grind. But Julian, despite his exhaustion, was competitive. He hated losing, even to himself. The next morning, he made it 30 minutes. The third morning, 45. By the end of the first week, he could sit for the full hour. The panic didn't vanish entirely, but it changed. It became a wave that he could observe, rather than a riptide that pulled him under. He began to apply Frugalitas elsewhere. He stopped eating lunch at his desk while scrolling through deal memos. He went to the firm's cafeteria, ate a simple salad, and stared out the window at the East River. He stopped the compulsive checking of his portfolio app on his phone. The initial sensation was terrifying, a fear of falling behind, a fear of missing the critical edge. But beneath the fear, a new feeling began to crystallize. Space. Mental bandwidth he didn't know he possessed. He coupled this with the second Roman pillar Arthur had briefly mentioned, Industria. Not just busy work, not the frantic, performative exhaustion of answering emails at midnight, but purposeful, deep labor. Julian began blocking out 3-hour chunks in his calendar marked Do Not Disturb. He turned off his notifications. He stopped attending meetings where his presence wasn't strictly required, using the Frugalitas mindset to ruthlessly cut the inessential. When he worked with a monastic focus. The result was a partial win, but it felt like a revelation. It happened on a Wednesday, 10 days into his new regimen. Rhett, the managing director, burst into Julian's office at 4 p.m., his face flushed, his voice bordering on hysteria. Meridian is blowing up. The target's CFO is playing games with the working capital. I need a new model scenario, worst case downside, by 9 a.m. tomorrow. Drop everything. In the past, this would have triggered an immediate cortisol dump. Julian would have felt the blood rush to his head, his chest tighten, and he would have stayed until 3 a.m., frantically building a chaotic, error-prone model fueled by adrenaline and takeout. Instead, Julian looked at Rhett. He felt the familiar spike in his chest, the alarm bell of the amygdala. But this time, there was a buffer. The 4 a.m. silence had built a dam. He watched the stress rise, acknowledged it, and let it recede. "I'll have it," Julian said, his voice steady and low. "But I need clarity on the working capital assumption before I build. Give me 20 minutes to pull the historicals, and I'll send you a baseline assumption to approve. Then I'll run the model tonight." Rhett blinked, momentarily thrown off by Julian's unflappable demeanor. He was used to his VPs absorbing his panic. Julian wasn't absorbing it. He was processing it. "Fine," Rhett muttered, retreating to his office. Julian went home at 6 p.m. He ate dinner. He sat in his armchair for 30 minutes. Then, from 8 p.m. to midnight, he built the model. He did it with Industria, deep, uninterrupted, precise work. No distractions, no panic. When he hit send at 11:45 p.m., the model was pristine. The next morning, Rhett called him into his office. The MD was leaning back in his chair, staring at the printout of Julian's model. "This is actually very good," Rhett said, sounding almost disappointed. "Clean, no leaks." Julian nodded. "It reflects the downside accurately. We shouldn't overpay just because the CFO is bluffing." Rhett studied him for a long moment. "You seem different, Hayes. Less frantic." "I'm just focused on what matters," Julian replied, the Roman words echoing in his mind. "Frugalitas, Industria. Need little, work deep." Walking back to his office, Julian felt a dangerous, intoxicating sensation. Control. For the first time in a decade, he wasn't reacting to the market. He was observing it. He wasn't a hostage to the gray noise. He was operating above it. The corporate fortress had not fallen, but inside his own mind, the bars of the cage had bent. He felt untouchable. He felt like a man who had finally discovered the secret to true wealth. He should have known that the empire always strikes back. The corporate storm didn't arrive with a whisper. It arrived on a Friday afternoon, the cruelest time for corporate warfare, when the defenders are already mentally checked out for the weekend. Julian was riding the high of his week. He had executed the Meridian model flawlessly. He had maintained his 4 a.m. silence. He was planning to leave the office at 5 p.m. for the first time in months. Maybe take a walk through the village, feel the autumn air. At 4:17 p.m., an email landed in his inbox. It was from the firm's global head of investment banking that Julian opened it, his prefrontal cortex, the very center he had worked so hard to fortify, froze. It was a restructuring. The firm was merging the industrials and the healthcare groups, a purely political move by the senior brass to consolidate power and cut overhead. But the real blow was in the sub-bullet points. To ensure streamlined client delivery, current VP leadership will be realigned. Julian Hayes will transition from his current portfolio to serve as VP of Operations Integration for the newly merged division. It was a death sentence. Operations Integration was a bureaucratic graveyard, a back-office purgatory, where frontline dealmakers were sent to die. He was being stripped of his revenue-generating portfolio. He was being stripped of his clients. He was being stripped of his shot at managing director. Worse, he wasn't fired. They weren't cutting his base salary. They were keeping him in the cage, but they were taking away the one thing that made the cage tolerable, the illusion of upward momentum. His phone rang. It was Rhett. Julian picked up the silence in his own office, roaring in his ears. "Julian," Rhett said, his voice completely devoid of empathy, nothing but the cold, efficient timbre of a corporate executioner. "I know this is a shock, but it came from the top. We need someone who can handle the messy integration work, someone who knows the models. It's a lateral move, a chance to broaden your horizons." Broaden his horizons. The corporate euphemism was a knife slipped neatly between the ribs. Julian stared out the window at the East River. The gray water seemed to churn violently, mirroring the sudden violent resurgence of the cortisol loop inside his brain. The HPA axis, dormant for a week, roared back to life. The phantom vibrations returned to his thigh. The acid flooded his throat. The walls of the 42nd floor pressed in, the HVAC whir suddenly sounding like a shriek. His new foundation, his Frugalitas, was cracking under the immense crushing weight of the corporatist Leviathan. The ancient firewall was facing its first real siege. Julian gripped the edge of his desk, his knuckles white. The test was here. The corporate storm did what it was designed to do. It sought to annihilate Julian's autonomy and force him back into the familiar, frantic rhythm of the people-pleaser. For 3 days, Julian Hayes sat at his new desk, a smaller, windowless cube in the operations bullpen, surrounded by the relentless, maddening squeak of dry erase markers on glass boards and the hollow, rhythmic thud of pneumatic staplers binding compliance reports. He was in the grave, and the dirt was being shoveled over him. It was 1:14 a.m. on a Wednesday. Julian was sitting on the floor of his Tribeca condo, his back against the cold steel of his Sub-Zero refrigerator, bathed in the bluish, artificial glow of the appliance's digital display. His laptop was open on the counter above him, a half-finished integration deck mocking him from the screen. He was exhausted, but it wasn't the physical exhaustion of building a model. It was the spiritual depletion of irrelevance. He dialed the number. He didn't care that it was past midnight. He needed an out. Arthur Pendleton answered on the second ring, his voice as steady and unbothered as a stone pillar. "Arthur, I can't do this," Julian whispered, his voice cracking, the raw vulnerability stripping away the polished banker facade. "I'm in a cubicle. Rhett won't even look at me in the hallway. The integration is a suicide mission. I'm going to tell them I quit. Or worse, I'm going to go back to being who I was. I'll take the late nights, I'll kiss the ring, I'll apologize for existing, and beg for my old clients back. At least when I was chasing the bonus, I felt like I was in the arena. This is just purgatory." There was a long, agonizing silence on the line. Julian could hear the faint ticking of a clock in Arthur's study. "You think this is about feeling better, Julian?" Arthur's voice was cold, devoid of the soothing platitudes Julian desperately craved. It was the voice of a Roman centurion addressing a trembling recruit. "Isn't it?" Julian asked, his voice hollow. "I followed the system, I sat in the silence, and they still took everything." "They took your portfolio," Arthur corrected, his tone sharp as a blade. "They took your title. They did not take your mind. You want to quit and run back to being a people-pleaser because it is easy. It is the path of least resistance. You want to trade your dignitas for a comfortable cage. The Roman way, Frugalitas, Liberalitas, Industria, is not a wellness retreat, Julian. It is not designed to make you feel better. It is designed to make you harder to break." Julian closed his eyes, the hum of the refrigerator vibrating against his spine. "You are in the real war now," Arthur continued, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "The enemy is not Rhett, or the firm, or the organizational chart. The enemy is your own frantic need for their approval. If you quit the system now, you surrender your soul to the mob. You are a Roman. Romans do not beg, they endure, they hold the line. Go back to the office, sit in the filth they gave you, and do the work. Not for them, for yourself." The line went dead. Julian sat in the dark. The phantom vibrations of his phone buzzed against his thigh, calling him back to the panic. But he didn't move. He closed his eyes, forced his jaw open, unclenched his fists, and sat in the silence. He didn't feel better. He felt the agonizing friction of a man choosing to weld his own armor in the dark. The true test of a metamorphosis is not how you act when you hold the crown, but how you hold your center when the crowd is throwing stones. It happened the following Tuesday, in the mandatory integration sync-up, a conference room in the bowels of the bank, designated for the unfortunates, tasked with merging the two warring divisions. Julian walked into the room last. The air was thick with the scent of stale, burnt coffee, and the suffocating, recycled flatulence of the overworked HVAC vents. The long table was a battlefield of bruised egos. Rhett was at the head, his sleeves rolled up, barking orders. Across the table sat Marcus, a rival VP who had been circling Julian's remaining clients like a vulture, smelling the blood in the water. Julian took his seat. He didn't open his laptop immediately. He didn't pull out his phone. He simply sat, his hands resting flat on the polished mahogany. Rhett immediately launched a volley. Julian, the client transition schedules are a disaster. The healthcare guys are dragging their feet. I need a timeline by noon, and I need you to personally call their leads and make them understand we aren't messing around. Get aggressive. It was a trap. Rhett was commanding Julian to pick a fight, to do the dirty work, and to make himself a target for the healthcare division's wrath. It was the exact kind of performative, approval-seeking task that the old Julian would have lunged at, eager to prove he was still a team player, eager to show Rhett he was a killer. The old Julian would have spoken first, overcompensated, and assured Rhett he would crush them. But Julian had rewired himself. He felt the impulse. There was a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline in his bloodstream, a hot flush at the base of his neck. His brain screamed, "Say yes! Prove your worth!" Appease the alpha. It was an evolutionary imperative, a biological urge to submit to the hierarchy to ensure survival. But this time, Julian didn't obey the chemical command. He applied Frugalitas to his words. He needed little from this room. He did not need Rhett's smile. He did not need Marcus's respect. Julian didn't speak first. He let the silence stretch. The silence in a corporate boardroom is a physical thing. It presses against the eardrums. It makes the clock on the wall sound like a jackhammer. 3 seconds passed. 5 seconds. Rhett's eyes narrowed, his jaw tightening, unaccustomed to the vacuum of compliance. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his chair. When Julian finally spoke, his voice was low, measured, and completely stripped of the frantic, upward-inflecting cadence of the subordinate. The healthcare leads are protecting their revenue. If I go in aggressively, they'll lock down the data and we'll lose 2 weeks. I won't be making those calls. The room went ice cold. Rhett leaned forward, his face reddening. "Excuse me? You won't. I will draft a joint memo outlining the operational synergies," Julian continued, his eyes locked on Rhett, unblinking, his hands perfectly still on the table. "It will be on your desk by noon. They will sign it because it makes them money, not because I yelled at them. That is the path. If you want someone to scream at them, you'll need to find someone else." Julian's heart was hammering against his ribs. The physical sensation of withholding his validation was excruciating. It felt like holding a heavy barbell above his chest, every muscle trembling with the effort of not collapsing into the comfortable servile posture of the people-pleaser. But as the seconds ticked by and he held Rhett's gaze, the trembling stopped. The heat in his neck faded. He was not invisible anymore. He was an immovable object in a room full of chaotic forces. Understand what just happened in your brain when you do this. Every single time you stay calm during a corporate fire, you are not just having a good day. You are physically rewiring your amygdala. This is neuroplasticity in action. The old neural pathway, the stimulus of the boss's anger leading to the response of your panic, was a superhighway. It was the path of least resistance. But when you pause, when you consciously withhold the reaction, you force your brain to build a new road. You recruit the prefrontal cortex to inhibit the amygdala. At first, this requires massive cognitive effort. It feels like walking through waist-deep mud. But every time you do it, the new pathway gets myelinated, coated in a fatty sheath that makes the signal travel faster and stronger. The old panic highway begins to wither from disuse. The new highway of dignitas becomes your default. Every time you do not beg for approval, you cast a vote for the person you want to become. Julian was casting his vote. He left the meeting without waiting for Rhett's dismissal. He walked back to his bullpen desk, the squeak of the dry erase markers, now a mere background whisper. He wrote the memo. It was a masterpiece of Industria, deep, insightful, and logically unassailable. And it worked. The healthcare division signed it. The integration moved forward. Julian didn't get a thank you. He didn't get applause. He got something far more valuable, his own silence. 6 months later, the dust had settled. The integration was a success, largely credited to the operational framework Julian had designed. He was still in the bullpen, but the desk was no longer a grave, it was a command center. He had cultivated a reputation that was entirely anomalous on the 42nd floor. He was the man who could not be rattled. He was the man who didn't need the bonus, didn't need the title, and therefore possessed a power that the firm could not buy. Then came the true test, the ultimate temptation. It was a Thursday afternoon. Julian was called into the corner office that belonged to the global head of investment banking. The mahogany was polished to a mirror shine. The view of the East River was breathtaking, a sprawling canvas of gray water and steel bridges. The global head, a man named Sterling, poured Julian a glass of 18-year-old Macallan. It was a gesture reserved for the anointed. "Julian," Sterling began, his voice smooth, designed to seduce. "We mishandled you, I'll admit it. The reorganization was clumsy. You should never have been moved out of your sector." Julian sipped the scotch. It was exquisite. It tasted like the promise of the corporate lie. He said nothing. "We're creating a new role," Sterling continued, sliding a black, leather-bound folder across the desk. "Managing Director, Head of Strategic Initiatives. It comes with a seat on the operating committee, a direct report line to me, and a compensation package that includes a $2 million guaranteed bonus backloaded over 3 years. $2 million, the ultimate golden handcuff. It was the exact number that would pay off the Tribeca mortgage, fund the lifestyle, and cement Julian's status in the aristocracy of the bank. All he had to do was reach out and take it. But Julian was reading the fine print in his mind. A role like strategic initiatives meant managing the chaos, playing the political game, and being on call 24/7 for Sterling's whims. It meant surrendering the 4 a.m. silence. It meant re-entering the cage, only now the bars would be made of gold. It required him to sacrifice the Roman peace he had bled to build. He would have to go back to needing much, and in needing much, he would be owned entirely. Julian looked at the folder. He felt the pull. The ego, the old, desperate version of himself, screamed from the depths of his psyche. "Take it. You've won. This is what you worked for." Julian placed his glass down on the desk. The clink of the crystal was sharp and final in the quiet room. "It's a generous offer, Sterling," Julian said, his voice completely flat, devoid of the manic gratitude the head was expecting. "But I can't accept the terms." Sterling's smile froze. "I'm sorry? The role requires a 24/7 commitment to internal politics," Julian stated. "I will continue to run the operational integrations as a VP. I will do it with absolute excellence. But I will not take a title that demands I surrender my autonomy. I'll be keeping my current compensation structure." Sterling stared at him, completely baffled. In the ecosystem of the bank, no one turned down the MD promotion. No one rejected the golden handcuff. It was against the religion of the firm. "You're saying no to the corner office?" Sterling asked, incredulous. "I'm saying yes to something else," Julian replied, standing up. He didn't explain. He didn't justify. He walked out of the corner office, leaving the black folder unopened on the desk. This was the climax, the quiet choice. He had chosen the system over the status. He had chosen Frugalitas over the illusion of power. He walked down the hallway, past the glass offices, past the frantic associates, past the humming fluorescent lights, and he felt a lightness in his chest that no $2 million bonus could ever buy. He was wealthy, because he needed little. Step back into the 42nd floor. The environment hasn't changed. The dry, recycled air still pumps through the ceiling vents. The faint, metallic scent of ozone from the overworked laptop processors still lingers. The overlapping, muffled voices still bleed through the drywall. The phantom vibrations still hum against the thigh of every passing executive. The static is still there. But for Julian Hayes, the static is gone. He sits at his desk, He is not vibrating. He is not frantically checking his phone. When Rhett walks by, Julian nods politely, utterly indifferent to the MD's approval. When a fire drill erupts on the floor, spreadsheets crashing, clients screaming, Julian observes it like a general watching a skirmish from a hilltop. He steps in only when necessary, applying Industria, working with deep monastic focus, and then he steps back. He practices the third and final pillar of the Roman secret, Liberalitas. In the modern world, we think of a liberal as someone who gives money away. But to the Romans, Liberalitas was the virtue of the free man. It meant giving of yourself, your time, your wisdom, your presence, without the expectation of return, because you are fundamentally whole. Because you need little, you can give much. Julian began mentoring the junior analysts in the bullpen, teaching them not just how to build a model, but how to hold their center in the storm. He gave them his time, freely, without tracking it on a timesheet. He was untouchable because he was finally truly free. "I'll stay in my current role," Julian told Sterling, standing up. "I'll finish the integration, but I won't be owned by a 3-year clawback. I'll keep my boundaries. If that works, I'm happy to serve the firm. If it doesn't, I'll walk." It was the quiet choice. The climax is not of a man conquering a mountain, but of a man simply stepping off the treadmill. He chose the system over the status. He walked out of the corner office, leaving the black folder on the desk unopened. 6 months later, the 42nd floor of Park Avenue, Julian Hayes is sitting at his desk. The HVAC system still hums its low, metallic drone, pumping oxygen-depleted air into the lungs of 200 analysts. The fluorescent lights still cast their pallid, lifeless glow over the spreadsheets. The phantom vibrations of the Slack channels still ripple through the thighs of the associates around him. The gray noise is still there, but for Julian the static is gone. He is no longer vibrating. He is no longer a hostage to the hum. He sits with a posture that is both relaxed and impossibly rigid, a man who has found his center of gravity. His desk is clean. His mind is clear. He operates with a terrifying, quiet efficiency. He does the work of Industria. He maintains the armor of Frugalitas, and he gives with Liberalitas. He is stone and flame, unmoving in the chaos, yet burning with a fierce internal purpose that cannot be extinguished by a bad quarter, a toxic review, or a reorganization. He has discovered the secret to true wealth. He has realized that the man who needs the corner office is a slave, and the man who can walk away from it is an emperor. His dignitas is no longer tied to the nameplate on his door. It is forged in his own soul. Look at your own life. Look at the screen in front of you, the notifications piling up, the weight of the expectation pressing down on your shoulders. You didn't click this video just to watch a story about an investment banker. You clicked it because you are tired. You are tired of vibrating. You are tired of the cage. You are tired of chasing a finish line that keeps moving, and you are terrified that if you stop running, you will fall. The Roman system is open. It has been open for 2,000 years, waiting for you to pick up the sword. The first step isn't updating your resume. It isn't finding a new job with a different logo on the lanyard. The first step is a new mindset. It is looking at the gray noise around you and deciding right now that you will need less, that you will sit in the silence, that you will stop begging for the approval of people who do not care about you. You can build a career, or you can build a cage. The choice is yours, but the tools are in your hands. In the comments below, tell me, what is the one corporate rule you're ready to break? Is it the rule that says you must answer emails within 5 minutes? Is it the rule that says you must attend every meeting you're invited to? Is it the rule that says your worth is defined by your bonus? Drop it below. Read the others. See that you are not alone in this war. Hold the line.